The sound of splitting timber woke Samuel Thornton from a dead sleep, and before he could throw his legs over the side of the bed, the entire roof of his homestead collapsed inward with a deafening crash that shook the earth beneath him. He rolled just in time to avoid being crushed by the main beam, his body slamming against the wall as dust and debris rained down in thick clouds that choked the air from his lungs. The winter of 1878 had been brutal in Taylorsville, Utah, with snow piling so high on his roof that the wooden structure simply could not bear the weight any longer. Now, everything he owned lay buried beneath splintered wood, twisted metal, and chunks of frozen snow that had punched through like cannonballs. His father's trunk, his mother's china that survived the journey west, the deed to his land, his winter provisions, all of it gone under a mountain of wreckage in the span of 3 heartbeats. Samuel coughed and spat out dust as he climbed free from the ruins, his hands already bleeding from the sharp edges of broken wood. The January morning was bitter cold, the kind that froze breath in mid-air and turned fingers numb within minutes. He stood there in his union suit and boots, staring at what remained of the home he had built with his own 2 hands over the course of 3 years. The walls still stood, barely, but the roof was completely gone, collapsed into the interior in a chaotic mess that looked like a giant had stomped down from the heavens. His chest tightened as the reality settled over him like the snow that continued to fall in lazy spirals from the gray sky above. He had nothing. No shelter, no food he could reach, no way to survive the winter that still had months to go. He had to dig. There was no other choice. Samuel grabbed a shovel that had been leaning against the exterior wall and started pulling debris away piece by piece, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he worked. The cold bit through his thin clothing, but he could not stop. Could not think about anything except getting to his supplies before they were completely destroyed or buried so deep he would never find them. His hands blistered and bled, but he kept moving, throwing boards and chunks of snow aside with desperate strength. Hours passed and he made barely any progress. The pile was too big, too heavy, too much for one man alone. That was when he heard the wagon. Samuel looked up, squinting through the snowfall, and saw a figure approaching on the road that ran past his property. The wagon was small, pulled by a single horse that looked as worn as he felt. As it drew closer, he could make out the driver, a woman bundled in a heavy coat with a scarf wrapped around her face against the cold. She pulled the wagon to a stop at the edge of his property line and climbed down, her boots crunching in the snow as she walked toward him with careful steps. "Mister, you all right?" she called out, her voice muffled by the scarf. Samuel wiped his face with his forearm, leaving a streak of dirt and blood across his cheek. Roof came down, lost everything. The woman came closer, pulling the scarf down to reveal a face framed by dark hair that escaped from beneath her hat. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with green eyes that assessed the damage with a sharp intelligence that surprised him. "You cannot dig through all that alone," she said matter-of-factly. "You will freeze to death before you reach anything useful." "I do not have much choice," Samuel replied, turning back to the pile. "Got to get my food stores out at minimum or I will starve. Then I will help you." He turned to stare at her. "You do not even know me." She shrugged, already moving toward the wreckage. "I am Katherine Vaughn. I live about 3 miles north of here. Passed by yesterday and your place was standing, so I figure this happened last night or this morning. That means whatever is under there is not completely destroyed yet, but it will be soon if we do not move fast. Now are you going to stand there talking or are you going to work?" Samuel blinked, taken aback by her directness, then nodded. "Samuel Thornton, and I appreciate the help, Miss Vaughn." "Mrs.," she corrected, though there was no ring on her finger visible through her gloves. "Widow, my husband died 2 years back. Now let me get some tools from the wagon." She returned with a second shovel and a pry bar, and together they began working in earnest. Katherine proved to be stronger than her frame suggested, working with efficient movements that spoke of hard labor and long days. They did not talk much at first, focusing all their energy on shifting the debris. Samuel would heave aside the larger beams while Katherine dug through the smaller pieces, creating pathways into the wreckage. The sun climbed higher but provided little warmth, and Samuel's fingers went numb despite the work. "There," Katherine said suddenly, pointing. "That looks like a corner of a trunk." Samuel followed her gaze and felt a surge of hope. Together they cleared away the surrounding debris until they could grab hold of the trunk and drag it free. The lid was dented but intact, and when Samuel forced it open, he found his father's belongings still dry and safe inside. The relief was so intense it made his knees weak. "What else do you need to find?" Katherine asked, already moving back to the pile. "Food stores are in the cellar, but the entrance is completely blocked," Samuel said, pointing to where the kitchen had been. "And I had a strong box with my money and papers under the bed." They worked for another 3 hours, stopping only briefly to catch their breath. Katherine's face was flushed from the exertion and the cold, but she never complained, never suggested stopping. Slowly, painfully, they made progress. They found the strong box, battered but secure. They cleared enough debris from the cellar entrance that Samuel could climb down and start hauling up sacks of flour, beans, and salt pork. Katherine organized everything in her wagon, creating a mental inventory as she went. By the time the sun started its descent toward the mountains, they had recovered most of Samuel's essential belongings and supplies. The wreckage still dominated his property, but at least now he had something to work with. Samuel stood looking at the pile, his body aching in ways he had never experienced, and tried to figure out his next move. "You cannot stay here," Katherine said, echoing his thoughts. "You need shelter tonight or you will not see morning." "I can rig up something with canvas," Samuel started, but Katherine cut him off with a shake of her head. "You are exhausted and half frozen already. You would not last the night in a makeshift tent, not with the temperature dropping like it is. You will come to my place." Samuel hesitated. "I cannot impose like that. It is not an imposition, it is common sense. I have a cabin with a spare room and a working fireplace. You can sleep, eat a hot meal, and come back tomorrow when you have your strength back. Unless you would rather freeze to death out of some misplaced sense of pride." The way she said it, with that same practical tone that brooked no argument, made Samuel realize she was right. His pride would not keep him warm, and he was no good to anyone dead. "All right," he agreed, "but just for tonight. I will start rebuilding tomorrow." Katherine nodded and began loading the last of the recovered items into her wagon. Samuel grabbed what he could carry and followed her lead. As they worked, he found himself watching her out of the corner of his eye. There was something about the way she moved, the quiet confidence in her actions, that intrigued him. She had shown up out of nowhere and spent an entire day helping a stranger with brutal physical labor, and she acted like it was the most natural thing in the world. The ride to Katherine's cabin took half an hour through deepening snow. The place came into view as they rounded a bend in the road, a solid structure built from logs with smoke curling from the chimney. It was small but well-maintained, with a barn behind it that looked sturdy enough to weather any storm. Katherine drove the wagon right up to the barn and started unhitching the horse. "Help me get your things inside, then we will tend to the animals," she said. They carried Samuel's belongings into the cabin, which was warm and smelled of bread and wood smoke. The interior was simple but comfortable, with a large fireplace dominating one wall, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, and two doors that led to what Samuel assumed were bedrooms. Katherine showed him to the spare room, which held a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk. "You can clean up here," she said. "There is water in the pitcher. I will get supper started." Samuel washed the dirt and blood from his hands and face, wincing at the cuts and blisters that covered his palms. When he emerged from the room, Katherine had changed into a simple dress and was stirring something in a pot on the stove. The kitchen table was already set for two. "Sit," she instructed. "This will be ready in a minute." Samuel sat, suddenly aware of how hungry he was. He had not eaten since the night before, and the smell of whatever Katherine was cooking made his stomach clench with need. She served him a bowl of stew thick with vegetables and chunks of meat, along with fresh bread that was still warm. He ate without speaking, too focused on the food to make conversation. Katherine ate more slowly, watching him with those sharp green eyes. When he finally slowed down, she refilled his bowl without asking. "When did you build your place?" she asked. "Started 3 years ago when I first came to Utah," Samuel said between bites. "Took me most of a year to get it finished, working alone. I bought the land with money I saved from working cattle drives down in Wyoming." "You are from Wyoming originally." "Colorado, actually. Denver. But I wanted my own land, and Utah Territory had homesteads available. Figured I would raise cattle, maybe some horses. The land is good for it." Katherine nodded. "It is. My husband and I came here 5 years ago from Missouri. He was a carpenter, built this cabin and half the buildings in Taylorsville before he got sick. Pneumonia took him quick." "I am sorry," Samuel said, meaning it. She shrugged, but he could see the old pain in her eyes. "It happens. I kept the place going on my own. I have chickens, a milk cow, and I grow vegetables in the summer. It is enough." They fell into silence again, but it was comfortable rather than awkward. After supper, Katherine showed Samuel where to find extra blankets and told him to get some rest. He was asleep almost before his head hit the pillow, his body shutting down from exhaustion. He woke before dawn to the sound of Katherine moving around in the kitchen. By the time he dressed and emerged, she had coffee brewing and was packing food into a basket. "I figured we would start early," she said when she saw him. "The sooner you start rebuilding, the better." Samuel accepted a cup of coffee and a plate of eggs and bacon. "You do not have to help me today," he said. "You already did more than enough yesterday." Katherine gave him a look that was half amused, half exasperated. "Samuel Thornton, you are going to need help whether you want to admit it or not. Building a roof is not a one-man job, especially not in winter. So drink your coffee and let us get moving." They returned to Samuel's property as the sun rose, painting the snow-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold. The wreckage looked even worse in the full light of day, a complete disaster that would take weeks to sort through. But Katherine did not hesitate. She climbed down from the wagon and started assessing the damage with a critical eye. "The walls are still solid," she said, walking the perimeter. "That is good. We can use them. Most of these roof beams are split, but some of them might be salvageable. We will need new timber, though, a lot of it. Do you have money for supplies?" Samuel nodded. "The strongbox had most of my savings. I can afford what we need." "Then first thing is to sort through what we can use and what needs to be hauled away. After that, we make a list and go into town for supplies. We should be able to get the frame up before the next big snow if we work steady." They spent that day and the next sorting through the wreckage, creating piles of salvageable wood, twisted metal that could be reused, and debris that needed to be burned or discarded. It was tedious, back-breaking work, but Katherine never complained. She worked alongside Samuel as an equal partner, and he found himself grateful not just for the help but for the company. She had a dry sense of humor that came out in unexpected moments, making him laugh when he least expected it. On the third day, they rode into Taylorsville together to purchase supplies. The town was small, just a main street with a general store, a blacksmith, a church, and a handful of other buildings. Katherine seemed to know everyone, greeting people by name as they passed. Samuel noticed the curious looks directed his way, the way people whispered to each other after Katherine introduced him. At the general store, they ordered timber, nails, tar paper, and everything else they would need. The owner, a balding man named Henry Cooper, gave Samuel a calculating look. "Heard your roof came down in the storm," he said. "That is a tough break. Lucky you got Katherine helping you. She is good people." "She is," Samuel agreed, glancing at Katherine, who was examining a display of tools with focused attention. They arranged for the timber to be delivered the next day and headed back to Katherine's cabin as afternoon faded into evening. That night, over another meal Katherine prepared, Samuel found himself talking more than he had in months. He told her about growing up in Denver, about his parents who died when he was 16, about the years he spent drifting from job to job before deciding he wanted something permanent, something that was his own. Katherine listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she was truly paying attention. In turn, she told him about Missouri, about the farm her family had owned, about meeting her husband James when she was 18, and following him west full of dreams and hope. "We were going to have children," she said softly, staring into her coffee cup. "We wanted a whole house full of them, but it never happened, and then he was gone, and suddenly I was alone in this place we built together." "You did not think about going back to Missouri?" Samuel asked. She shook her head firmly. "This is my home. James is buried here. I put too much work into this land to just abandon it, and besides, I like it here. I like the independence, the space. Back in Missouri, I would have been expected to move back in with my parents or marry again as soon as possible. Here, I can be my own person." Samuel understood that. It was part of why he had come west too, the desire to be free from expectations and forge his own path. They talked late into the night, and when Samuel finally went to bed, he found himself thinking about Katherine in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude for her help. The timber arrived the next morning, and the real work began. Samuel and Katherine spent days measuring, cutting, and fitting beams together. Katherine, it turned out, had learned a great deal from her carpenter husband, and she knew how to read Samuel's rough plans and translate them into reality. They worked in tandem, Samuel providing the muscle while Katherine provided the technical knowledge, creating a partnership that was more effective than Samuel could have imagined. The weather cooperated, staying cold but clear, and they made good progress. Other people from Taylorsville stopped by occasionally, offering advice or lending a hand for a few hours. Samuel began to understand that Katherine was well liked in the community, respected for her independence and her willingness to help others. People treated her as a friend and equal, which was unusual for a woman on her own. As the days passed and the roof began to take shape, Samuel found himself looking forward to each morning not just because of the work, but because it meant spending time with Katherine. She challenged him, made him think, made him laugh. She did not defer to him or act helpless, which he found refreshing. When she disagreed with his approach to something, she said so directly, and they would debate until they found a solution that satisfied them both. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the roof collapsed, they were sitting on what remained of Samuel's front porch, taking a break and watching the sun set over the mountains. The roof frame was up, solid and strong, and they had started laying down the boards that would support the tar paper and shingles. Another week, maybe less, and it would be finished. I cannot thank you enough for all this, Samuel said, not for the first time. Katherine smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. You have said that about 100 times now. I think I know you are grateful. I mean it, though. I do not know what I would have done without you. Probably would have frozen to death or given up and moved back to Colorado. You would not have given up, Katherine said with certainty. You are too stubborn for that, but I am glad I could help. It has been nice having someone to talk to, someone to work with. I did not realize how lonely I was until you showed up. Samuel looked at her, at the way the fading light caught in her dark hair and made her green eyes seem to glow. His heart was beating faster, and he knew he was standing on the edge of something important, something that could change everything. Katherine, he started, then paused, searching for the right words. These past weeks, getting to know you, working alongside you, it has meant a lot to me, more than just the help with rebuilding. She turned to face him fully, her expression serious. What are you saying, Samuel? I am saying that I have feelings for you. Strong feelings. I know it might seem too soon, and maybe I have no right to say anything, but I cannot keep it to myself anymore. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I find myself thinking about you all the time, wondering what you are doing, looking forward to seeing you. I do not want these days to end, do not want to go back to living alone on my property while you live alone on yours. Katherine was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand, her fingers threading through his. I have been having the same thoughts, she admitted. At first I told myself it was just because you needed help, that I was just being a good neighbor. But it is more than that. I like you, Samuel. I like who you are, how you treat me as an equal, how you work hard and do not complain. I like talking to you, spending time with you. When I think about you leaving, going back to your place and not seeing you every day, it makes my chest hurt. Samuel felt a surge of hope so intense it made him dizzy. Then what do we do about it? I do not know, Katherine said honestly. James has only been gone 2 years. Part of me feels guilty for having these feelings so soon, but another part of me thinks that life is too short and too hard to waste time on guilt. James would not want me to be alone forever. He would want me to be happy. I want you to be happy too, Samuel said. And I want to be the one who makes you happy if you will let me. Katherine squeezed his hand. I think you already do make me happy, but let us take this slow, all right. Let us finish the roof, get you settled back in your place, and see how we feel then. This has been an intense few weeks, and I want to make sure what we are feeling is real and not just born out of circumstances. Samuel nodded, understanding her caution even as part of him wanted to rush forward, to declare his feelings more boldly and damn the consequences. But Katherine was worth being patient for, worth doing things right. Slow, he agreed. I can do slow. They sat there holding hands as the stars began to appear overhead, neither one wanting to break the moment. Finally, the cold drove them back to Katherine's cabin, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that could not be taken back. The next week passed in a blur of work and growing intimacy. They did not kiss, did not do anything overtly romantic, but there were small touches, hands brushing as they passed tools, shoulders bumping as they worked side by side. They talked about everything, sharing stories from their pasts, debating politics and religion, discussing their hopes for the future. Samuel learned that Katherine loved to read, that she had a small collection of books she treasured and reread constantly. Katherine learned that Samuel had a talent for carving wood, that he could create beautiful little figures of animals and people with just a knife and a piece of scrap. The roof was finished on a clear, cold morning in early February. Samuel hammered the last shingle into place and climbed down from the ladder, his breath steaming in the frigid air. Katherine was waiting below, her face flushed with pride and satisfaction. "It is done," she said, stating the obvious but needing to say it anyway. "It is," Samuel agreed. He looked up at the roof, solid and strong, better than the original had been. "We did it." "You did it," Katherine corrected. "I just helped." "No," Samuel said firmly. "We did it together. I could not have done this without you, Katherine. You saved me in more ways than one." She smiled at that, a soft, tender expression that made his heart skip. "Then I am glad I was passing by that morning." They spent the rest of the day moving Samuel's belongings back into the house, arranging furniture and putting things in order. By evening, the place looked lived in again, a home rather than a disaster site. Katherine made supper in Samuel's newly restored kitchen, and they ate together at his table, which had survived the collapse with only minor damage. After the meal, Katherine started gathering her things, preparing to head back to her own cabin. Samuel watched her, his chest tight with an emotion he could not quite name. The thought of her leaving, of going back to separate lives after weeks of constant companionship, was almost unbearable. "Katherine, wait," he said as she was pulling on her coat. She paused, turning to look at him with questioning eyes. "What is it?" Samuel closed the distance between them, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "I know we said we would take things slow, and I respect that. But I need you to know that these past weeks have been the best of my life. Not despite the disaster, but because of it, because it brought you into my life. I do not want to go back to being alone. I do not want to only see you when we happen to pass on the road. I want to court you properly, Katherine Vaughn. I want to take you to church socials and dances, want to have dinner with you and talk until late at night, want to build a future with you. If you will have me." Katherine set down the bag she was holding and stepped closer to him, reaching up to cup his face with her hand. Her palm was warm against his cheek, and her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Samuel Thornton, I would be honored to be courted by you. These weeks have been the best of my life too, and I do not want them to end either. So yes, I will have you, and gladly." Samuel could not help himself. He leaned down and kissed her, a gentle press of lips that held all the longing and hope he had been carrying. Katherine melted into the kiss, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, pulling him closer. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless and smiling. "I should probably still go home tonight," Katherine said, though she made no move to step away. "For propriety's sake." "Probably," Samuel agreed, "but I will call on you tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that." "I will look forward to it," Katherine said. Samuel drove her home in her wagon, then rode the horse back to his place under a sky full of stars. He could not stop smiling, could not stop thinking about the feel of Katherine's lips against his, the warmth of her in his arms. When he finally crawled into bed in his rebuilt home, he slept better than he had in years. True to his word, Samuel called on Katherine the next day and every day after that. They fell into a routine of shared meals and long conversations, of working together on their respective properties and helping each other with chores. The people of Taylorsville quickly figured out that something was developing between them, and the general consensus seemed to be approval. Samuel and Katherine were both well-liked, both hardworking and honest, and people thought they made a good match. As winter began to fade into early spring, Samuel knew he wanted to marry Katherine. He had known it for weeks if he was honest with himself, but he wanted to do things properly. He wanted to court her, to give her time to be certain, to make sure everyone knew he was serious about his intentions. On a warm day in late March, Samuel rode into Taylorsville and visited the jeweler, a wizened old man named Albert Finch who had a shop above the general store. Samuel explained what he wanted, and Albert showed him a selection of rings. Samuel chose a simple gold band with a small diamond, nothing fancy but beautiful in its simplicity. He paid for it with money from his savings, money he had been carefully hoarding for years. That evening, he invited Katherine to his place for supper. He spent hours preparing the meal, wanting everything to be perfect. He cleaned the house until it gleamed, set the table with his mother's china, and cooked the best meal he knew how to make. When Katherine arrived, she looked around in surprise. "What is all this?" she asked, taking in the candles and the fancy table setting. "I wanted to do something special for you," Samuel said, feeling suddenly nervous. "To thank you for everything and to show you how much you mean to me." Katherine's eyes softened. "Samuel, you do not need to do all this. I know how you feel about me." "I know," he said, "but I wanted to anyway." They ate slowly, savoring the food and the conversation. After the meal, Samuel suggested they sit outside on the porch to watch the sunset. The air was mild, the first real hint of spring, and the mountains were starting to lose their snow cover, revealing the green underneath. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Samuel took a deep breath and turned to Katherine. "I have something I want to ask you," he said. Katherine looked at him, curiosity and something that might have been anticipation in her eyes. "What is it?" Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring box. He opened it, revealing the gold band with its small diamond, and watched Katherine's eyes go wide. "Katherine Vaughn, I fell in love with you while we were digging through the wreckage of my roof and rebuilding my home. You showed me what true partnership looks like, what it means to have someone by your side who sees you as an equal and a friend. I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore, do not want to imagine it. Will you marry me?" Katherine's hands flew to her mouth, and tears spilled down her cheeks. For a terrifying moment, Samuel thought she might say no, but then she was nodding, laughing, and crying at the same time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Samuel, I will marry you. I love you too, have loved you for weeks now, but was afraid to say it. Yes, 1,000 times yes." Samuel's hands shook as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he was pulling her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and joy flooding through him. Katherine kissed him back just as fiercely, her fingers tangling in his hair, and for a long, perfect moment, the whole world narrowed down to just the two of them. They were married 6 weeks later in the small church in Taylorsville, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Katherine wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair. Samuel wore his best suit, brushed and pressed until it looked almost new. The ceremony was short and sweet, conducted by the circuit preacher who passed through Taylorsville once a month. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed Katherine to enthusiastic applause and cheering from their friends and neighbors. The reception was held at the church hall, with everyone contributing food and drink. There was music and dancing, and Samuel discovered that Katherine was an excellent dancer, light on her feet and graceful. They danced together for hours, laughing and spinning, surrounded by people who genuinely wished them well. As the sun set, Samuel and Katherine said their goodbyes and rode back to Samuel's place, which would now be their place. Katherine had sold her cabin and land to a young couple who had just arrived in Utah Territory, looking for a fresh start. The money from the sale, combined with Samuel's savings and the profits from both their properties, gave them a comfortable financial cushion. That night, in the home they had rebuilt together, Samuel and Katherine came together as husband and wife. It was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the love they had been building for months. Afterwards, lying in each other's arms, Samuel felt a sense of completeness he had never experienced before. "I am the luckiest man alive," he murmured into Katherine's hair. She tilted her head back to look at him, her green eyes shining in the lamplight. "We are both lucky," she said. "We found each other when we needed it most. We built something together, and now we get to keep building for the rest of our lives." "I love you, Katherine Thornton," Samuel said, still getting used to the sound of her new name. "I love you too, Samuel," she replied, snuggling closer against his chest. As spring turned to summer, they settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They worked their land together, planting crops and tending to the expanding herd of cattle Samuel had been building. Katherine's business sense complemented Samuel's ranching skills, and together they made the property more profitable than Samuel had ever managed on his own. They added onto the house, building a larger kitchen and a second bedroom for future children. Their neighbors often commented on how well suited they were, how they worked together like two halves of a whole. Samuel and Katherine became known for their hospitality, opening their home for church gatherings and community events. They helped other families in need, remembering how Katherine had stopped to help Samuel in his darkest hour. By the time fall arrived, Katherine had news that filled them both with joy. She was pregnant, expecting their first child in early spring. Samuel was beside himself with excitement, building a cradle in his workshop and making plans for the future. Katherine was more practical, focusing on preparing the house and gathering supplies for the baby. The winter passed slowly, with both of them anxious and excited. Katherine had an easy pregnancy, staying active and healthy throughout. Samuel doted on her, constantly worried that she was doing too much, but Katherine just laughed at his concerns and continued her daily routine with only minor modifications. On a warm March evening, almost exactly a year after Samuel had proposed, Katherine went into labor. Samuel rode hard into Taylorsville to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Martha Bowman, who had delivered most of the babies in the area. Martha arrived quickly and took charge, sending Samuel out of the bedroom with instructions to boil water and stay out of the way. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Samuel paced the main room, nearly wearing a hole in the floor with his worried walking. Every cry from Katherine made his heart clench, and he cursed his inability to help her through the pain. Finally, as the sun climbed high in the sky, he heard a different sound, the thin wail of a newborn baby. Martha emerged from the bedroom a few minutes later, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she announced, "a healthy boy with good lungs. Your wife wants to see you." Samuel rushed into the bedroom and found Katherine propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing with happiness. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket, a red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair. Samuel approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son for the first time. "He is perfect," Samuel whispered, reaching out to stroke the baby's soft cheek with one finger. "He is," Katherine agreed. "I was thinking we could name him James Samuel after both his grandfathers. What do you think?" Samuel's throat tightened with emotion. Katherine's gesture of honoring both her late husband and his father touched him deeply. "I think that is perfect," he managed to say. "James Samuel Thornton." The baby, as if recognizing his name, opened his eyes and stared up at his parents with that unfocused gaze of the very young. Samuel felt something shift inside him, a fierce, protective love that was unlike anything he had ever experienced. This was his son, his family, the future he and Katherine were building together. The next few months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and tiny milestones. James was a good baby, healthy and strong, and watching Katherine with him made Samuel fall in love with her all over again. She was a natural mother, patient and tender, singing lullabies in the night and teaching their son to smile. Samuel threw himself into work, expanding the ranch and increasing their profits. He wanted to provide well for his family, to give Katherine and James everything they needed and more. Katherine balanced managing the household with helping run the ranch, proving that motherhood had not diminished her capabilities in the slightest. As James grew from infant to toddler, Samuel and Katherine discussed having more children. They both wanted a large family, wanted the house to be filled with noise and laughter. Katherine became pregnant again when James was 2 years old, and 9 months later, they welcomed a daughter they named Roseanne. 2 years after that, another son arrived, whom they named William Robert. Their family grew, and so did their home and their hearts. The years passed in a rhythm of work and joy, hardship and triumph. There were difficult times, droughts that threatened the crops and harsh winters that tested their endurance. But Samuel and Katherine faced everything together, their partnership as strong as the roof they had built together all those years ago. When James was old enough to understand, Samuel told him the story of how he met his mother, how the roof had collapsed and buried everything, how Katherine had appeared like an angel to help him dig out and rebuild. James loved the story, asking to hear it again and again, and Samuel never tired of telling it. It was, after all, the story of how his life truly began. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Samuel and Katherine stood on their porch watching their children play in the yard. James was 12 now, tall and strong like his father, already helping with the ranch work. Rose was 8, bright and curious, always asking questions about everything. William was 6, wild and energetic, constantly getting into mischief. Katherine was pregnant again, their 4th child due in the fall. "Can you believe it has been 10 years?" Katherine asked, leaning against Samuel's side. Samuel wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. But I would not change a single day of it. Not even the day your roof collapsed," Katherine teased. Samuel laughed. "Especially not that day. That was the day my real life started, even if I did not know it at the time. Losing that roof was the best thing that ever happened to me because it brought you into my life." Katherine turned to look up at him, her eyes still as green and bright as they had been that first day. "You brought yourself into my life too. You could have turned me away, could have been too proud to accept help, but you let me in, let me be part of rebuilding. That took courage." "I think we were both brave that day," Samuel said. "Brave enough to accept help, brave enough to let someone new into our lives, brave enough to take a chance on each other. And look what we built," Katherine said, gesturing to the house, the land, their playing children. "All from the ruins of a collapsed roof." Samuel kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Best roof that ever fell down," he said. Katherine laughed, that full, genuine laugh he loved so much. Only you could say something like that and make it romantic. They stood there together as the sun began to set, painting the Utah sky in brilliant colors. Their children's laughter rang out across the property, mixing with the sounds of the cattle lowing in the distance and the chickens settling in for the night. Everything Samuel looked at, everything he heard, was a testament to what he and Katherine had created together. The 4th child, a daughter they named Margaret Elizabeth, arrived in October, healthy and beautiful. Samuel had expanded the house twice more over the years, and now it was a proper ranch house, spacious enough for their growing family. He had built Katherine a real kitchen with a modern stove and plenty of workspace, knowing how much time she spent there cooking and baking for their brood. As the children grew, Samuel made sure they all knew the value of hard work and partnership. He and Katherine raised them to be independent and capable, teaching the girls everything they taught the boys. Rose and Margaret learned to ride and rope just as well as their brothers, and James and William learned to cook and clean alongside their sisters. Samuel wanted his children to understand that a true partnership, like the one he had with Katherine, meant sharing everything equally. The ranch continued to prosper. Samuel's cattle were known throughout the territory for their quality, and buyers came from as far as Denver to purchase his stock. Katherine managed the finances and the business side of things, her sharp mind and head for numbers ensuring they always made smart decisions. Together, they became one of the most successful ranching families in the area. On their 20th anniversary, their children threw them a surprise party. James, now 22 and courting a girl from Taylorsville, had organized the whole thing with help from his siblings. Friends and neighbors filled the house, everyone bringing food and gifts. There was music and dancing, storytelling and laughter. Samuel and Katherine were overwhelmed by the outpouring of love and respect from their community. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had gone home, Samuel and Katherine found themselves alone on the porch once more. It had become their spot over the years, the place where they went to talk and think and simply be together. The night was warm, full of stars, and from inside the house, they could hear their children cleaning up and talking among themselves. 20 years, Katherine said softly. Sometimes I still cannot believe it. I was so lonely before you came into my life, Samuel. I did not realize how lonely until I had you to compare it to. I was lost, Samuel replied, drifting through life without a real purpose. Building the ranch was satisfying, but it was just work. You gave me something to build for, someone to share it all with. You made everything matter. Katherine leaned her head on his shoulder. We saved each other, I think. You needed help digging out from under that collapsed roof, and I needed help digging out from under the loneliness that was burying me. We rebuilt more than just a house that winter. We rebuilt each other. Samuel thought about that, about the truth in her words. The physical rebuilding of the roof had been important, but it was symbolic of something much deeper. They had both been buried under their own kinds of rubble when they met, him literally and her figuratively. Together, they had dug each other out and created something beautiful and lasting. I love you, Katherine, Samuel said, the same words he had spoken thousands of times over the years, but they never lost their meaning or their power. I love you too, Samuel, Katherine replied, also for the 1000th time, her voice just as sincere as the first. They sat there in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Inside, their children were laughing about something, the sound floating out through the open windows. This was what Samuel had dreamed of when he first came to Utah Territory all those years ago, though he had not known how to articulate it then. He had wanted a home, a family, a place to belong. He had wanted roots and purpose and love. And he had found all of it, pulled from the wreckage of a collapsed roof and built into something that would last generations. The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and sorrows as all lives do. James married his sweetheart and started his own ranch on land Samuel helped him purchase. Rose surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, one of the first female teachers in the territory, running the schoolhouse in Taylorsville. William took over more and more of the ranch operations as Samuel got older, showing the same skill and dedication his father had. Margaret married a doctor and moved to Salt Lake City, though she visited often with her growing family. Samuel and Katherine became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their family tree spread and flourish. They aged together gracefully, their hair turning silver, their hands becoming gnarled from years of hard work, but their love never dimming. They still held hands when they walked, still stole kisses when they thought no one was looking, still sat on their porch every evening to watch the sunset and talk about their day. On a quiet summer evening in 1908, 30 years after that fateful roof collapse, Samuel and Katherine sat on their porch as usual. Samuel was 75 now, Katherine 72, and their bodies were not as strong as they once were. But they were still together, still partners in every sense of the word. The ranch was now run primarily by William and his sons, but Samuel still liked to be involved, offering advice and wisdom gained from decades of experience. "You remember when we first built this porch?" Katherine asked, her voice softer than it used to be but still clear. "I do," Samuel said. "You insisted we needed a place to sit and watch the sunset. I thought it was unnecessary, but you were right. You are always right." Katherine laughed, the sound a little creaky but still genuine. "Not always, but I was right about the porch, and I was right about stopping to help a stubborn cowboy whose roof had fallen in." "Best decision you ever made," Samuel said with a grin. "Best decision we both made," Katherine corrected. "You letting me help, me offering to help, all of it. Every decision we have made together for the past 30 years has been right because we made them together." Samuel squeezed her hand gently, carefully, aware of how fragile they both were becoming. But his love for her was not fragile. It was the strongest, most enduring thing in his life. "I would not change a single moment," he said. "Not one. Every hardship, every struggle, every loss, they were all worth it because I went through them with you by my side." Katherine turned to look at him, her green eyes still bright despite her age. "When I am gone," she started, but Samuel shook his head. "Do not talk like that," he protested. "We have to," Katherine said gently. "We are not young anymore, Samuel. One of us will leave first, and we need to make sure the one who remains knows what the other would want. So when I am gone, I do not want you to mourn forever. I want you to remember the good times, the love we shared, the life we built. I want you to sit on this porch and watch the sunset and feel happy, not sad. Can you promise me that?" Samuel's eyes filled with tears. "I do not know if I can live without you, Katherine." "You can and you will," she said firmly. "Because you are strong and because our children and grandchildren will need you. But Samuel, if I go first, know that every moment with you was a gift. From that first day when I saw your roof had fallen in and decided to stop and help, to this very moment right now, you have been the great love of my life. You made me happier than I ever thought possible. So do not waste time on grief. Celebrate what we had." Samuel pulled her close, holding her as carefully as he would hold a precious piece of glass. "I will try," he promised. "And if I go first, you do the same. Keep living, keep being the strong, amazing woman you have always been. Tell our grandchildren about us, about how we met and fell in love while rebuilding a roof. Make sure they know that love is not just about the easy times. It is about working together when things fall apart, about helping each other dig out from under the rubble, about building something better than what was there before." "I will," Katherine promised. They sat there holding each other as the stars began to appear, just as they had done thousands of times before. Their porch, their home, their land, their family, everything they had built together surrounded them like a warm embrace. The roof above them, built with love and partnership 30 years ago, still stood strong and true, a lasting symbol of what they had created together. Samuel and Katherine Thornton had many more years together, living into their 80s, a remarkable age for that time and place. They passed within months of each other, Katherine going first in her sleep one spring morning, and Samuel following that same fall, his heart giving out as he sat on their porch watching the sunset alone. Their children and grandchildren mourned them, but also celebrated them, telling the story of the roof that fell in and the love that grew from the ruins. The story became part of the family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the worst disasters can lead to the greatest blessings, and that true love is built through partnership, hard work, and the willingness to help someone dig out from under their rubble and start again.